Welcome back, everybody, to the theory of evolution versus creation. And I just wanted to show this picture as an illustration of the difference between these two belief systems. And so the top one is the evolution tree of life, and this is simply the belief that all of life, as we know it today, has come from a single common ancestor. And from that common ancestor, everything branched out into this tree where everything is related in one way or another back to this common ancestor. So there's different variations within a horse family or a dog family or a cat family, but all of those are related to each other because they go back to this single common ancestor. And versus in creation, we believe in the forest of life, not the tree of life. And so in the forest of life, God made there's different kinds of horses, there's different kinds of dogs, and he made them according to their kinds. Now they have branched out from that kind, and so like when God originally made dogs, I don't believe there was poodles in the garden, but they have that dog kind has branched out, so we have poodles today. So there's been variations and changes within those kinds, but those kinds always reproduce after their own kind, and this goes back to a common designer, not a common ancestor. And so that's just a simple belief difference between these two things. So as I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to be getting into literal lies that we find in our textbooks today. And I'm going to begin doing that by talking to you about a German scientist named Ernest Haeckel who lived from 1834 to 1919. And he said that the similarity between early stages in the development of many different animals convinced Darwin that all forms of life shared a common ancestor. And so what he's talking about is the embryo stage, when an animal is in the very beginning stages of its life. He's saying that all these different embryo stages, whether it be a human or a dog or a cat or a horse, they all look the same. And because they all look the same in their early stages, that means that we came from a common ancestor. So that's what he's referring to. And Darwin himself considered this to be, quote, by far the strongest facts in favor of his theory, unquote. Now, you got to be careful, guys, when they throw out words like facts, because the funny thing is that is not a fact at all, as I'm about to show you. And so Haeckel read Darwin's book in 1860 after it had been translated into German. And he waited for 9 years for more evidence to come out that supported Darwin's theory because, at this point in time, there was barely or hardly, if any, evidence that evolution was actually true. It was complete theory. And so he was waiting for evidence to come out regarding this, and just nothing was coming out. So after 9 years, he decided to make his own evidence. And so this is a real picture of a dog embryo at 4 weeks beside a human embryo at 4 weeks. So just notice how different they look. They are completely different in their early stages of development. However, this is a picture of what Ernest Haeckel drew. He literally redrew what the early embryo stages looked like between a dog and a human, and he made them look the same so that he could convince people that evolution was true and we had a common ancestor because we looked so similar in the early embryo stage. So he did the exact same thing with a fish, a salamander, a turtle, a chicken, a rabbit, and a human. And so he drew these. You can see the ones at the very top. All the embryos at the very top are the earliest stage, and they all look the same, and then they develop and they change over time after that. And so he actually put these on giant posters and traveled Germany, convincing and converting the German people to believe in evolution because this obviously proved that we came from a common ancestor. And so this is an actual ultrasound of what these animals really look like at these embryo stages. And so on the top you can see Haeckel's fake drawings, and on the bottom you can see what they actually look like. And so Haeckel straight up lied and created evidence to make up for the missing evidence of evolution that no one could find. And this got him into trouble because he was found out for this, and at his own university, 6 other professors charged him with fraud. He was literally charged with fraud for doing this, and at his trial he said, quote, "I should feel utterly condemned were it not for the hundreds of the best observers and biologists who lie under the same charge," unquote. And so keep in mind these pictures on the top and what they look like, because now we're going to look at a textbook. So this is a picture of something taken from our textbooks today, and around the same time that Henkel's fake drawings came out, they also came out with a theory that they actually ended up calling a law, that there appeared to be gill-like structures in the early embryo stages of a human. And because of this proved that we came from a common fish-like ancestor, and they called it biogenetic law. Biogenetic law. It just sounded so official. It must be true because they're calling it a law. And so this textbook reads, "It is as if the embryo retains a memory of its origins and starts to copy them during its development. These structures persist in adult fish. The presence of these fish-like structures in embryos of different species shows that these animals have evolved from fish and share the basic pattern of fish development." Notice in this picture, guys, look at the top. They're using Ernest Henkel's fake drawings that he was charged with fraud for. They're using his drawings still. They're still in our textbook. That is not what the early stages of embryos look like for a human or a bird. And so, again, guys, this is not science. This is indoctrination. This is not education. Those are fraudulent drawings that don't exist in the real world, which is why you won't see an actual photograph of it. We live in the 21st century. How come there's not a real actual picture taken with a camera of these things? The reason is they don't exist in the real world. They only exist in your textbook, so they have to draw them. And so let's take a closer look at this biogenetic law. This is again just where they are showing that humans have these gill-like slits in the early stages of the embryo, just like the fish do, which goes to show that they have a common fish-like ancestor. And again, this is out of a textbook that they're teaching to our kids still. However, the truth is that these supposed gills have been proven to have absolutely nothing to do with breathing, and what they really do is become bones and glands in the throat and in the ear of a human. That's what those things turn into. They turn into glands and bones. Absolutely nothing to do with breathing. Nothing to do with anything resembling a fish. Scientist Keith Thomas rightly said in 1988, "Biogenetic law is as dead as a doornail." W.R. Thomas wrote in his foreword, a 1956 edition of The Origin of Species, "The biogenetic law as proof for evolution is worthless." This ridiculous theory was proven wrong way back in the late 1800s, and it was thrown in the trash by both evolutionists and creationists alike, and yet they are still teaching it in your textbooks, which is the only place you'll actually find this. It's not in the real world. And so, again, guys, this is just a straight-up lie that's in our textbook that needs to be removed. It is absolutely false. It is not science. It's religious. So just as a recap, remember in my previous videos that James Hutton wrote the book The Theory of the Earth in 1795, which made people doubt that the Earth was 6,000 years old. Charles Lyell wrote his Principles of Geology in 1830, and this made people doubt the flood. And between both these two men, they began to teach people that the Earth was millions and millions of years, whereas before they all thought it was thousands of years old because they believed the Bible. And so then Darwin's book came out in 1859, The Origin of Species, which made people doubt the Creator. And so I just want to show you the progression of doubt that's being sown into a culture, and I want to propose to you that there's a spiritual dynamic to this, because it goes back to the garden. What Satan said to Eve in the garden, has God really said? That is his tactic that is as old as time itself. He doesn't change how he does things. It just looks different depending on which people group he's dealing with. And I would propose to you that that's exactly what he's doing here. He's getting a whole culture and a whole people to question the beginning, to question Genesis, because if God is wrong in Genesis, then where else is he wrong in his word? He could be wrong anywhere or everywhere in his word. If the enemy can get you to doubt, has God really said that the earth is really 6,000 years old? Did he really flood it? Is there really a creator? right? This is a progression of doubt sown into a culture. And so I just wanted to point that out because I think it's important to zoom out and see that perspective of the progression of these things and where they have led into getting God out of our culture and this so-called pseudoscience in. And I'm going to keep going through this to show you why I think this isn't actually science. This is religious when it comes to evolution. So I believe all three of these are wrong teachings that they're teaching in our school systems, that there's millions of years, uniformitarianism, and evolution. I don't have any problem with you teaching these as theories. I actually really don't. But the way that they're being taught in our schools as fact is what is wrong, because they're not facts. They are theories. And I'm going to keep elaborating on this as we go on. And so I showed you in my last video a little bit of the evolutionary of whales, but look, this is a grade 4 textbook. Okay, so this is grade 4. We've been learning this for as long as we can remember. Ever since we were in grade school, this is what's been pounded into our brains. And I showed you, most evolutionists now believe that the whale came from a hippopotamus or from a cow. And so this progression that you see in the picture here may not be as accurate as what most evolutionists would believe today, but it just gives you an idea of what our kids have been taught. And so again, the whole cow and hippopotamus evolving into a whale has zero evidence, no intermediate links, no missing links, no evidence of a cow slowly changing into a whale. They don't exist in the dirt, and we don't see it happening now. We don't see a cow walking around with its front legs slowly turning into a flipper. We don't see that. So if we don't see it today, and we haven't seen it in the past, that's left the realm of science, because science has to be observational, and you've gotten into the realm of religion, an incredible faith, because it's not observable. We've never seen it. And so anyway, that's important to point out, because we do not see this in the past or in the present. Therefore, it's faith. So I just want to talk real quick about how fossils are formed, and they're formed in a number of different ways. But most are formed when a plant or animal dies in a watery environment and is buried in mud and silt. And so I highlighted watery environment because that's exactly what we would have in a worldwide flood. We should have fossils all over the world that were buried very quickly due to being in a watery environment such as a flood. And lo and behold, it's exactly what we find all over the planet. And so soft tissues quickly decompose, leaving the hard bones or shells behind. And over time, sediment builds over top and hardens into rock. So textbooks teach us that the fossil record of the fossil column reveals evolution and the rough age of the Earth based on layers of rocks and the fossils that are found in those layers. So another term for layers is strata. And notice again, guys, we have another drawing. And the reason we have another drawing is because you will only find the order of these things that they presented to you in less than 1% of the Earth's crust. Less than 1% of the time it will look exactly like this. In most places, the order of these things is all over the place. And so there's about 10 to 13 layers that we have here, and in some places there's a little bit more depending on how you break them down. But again, you won't actually find this picture in very many places. We absolutely have found it in some places, but it is not everywhere like they propose in this picture. Dr. D. Berlin said this. He said that there are gaps in the fossil record where there should be intermediate forms, where he's talking about where an animal is changing from one kind into another if evolution is true. So we have gaps in the fossil record where there should be intermediate forms, but where there is nothing whatsoever instead. And he says no paleontologist writing in English, French, or German denies that this is so. It is simply a fact. Darwin's theory and the fossil record are in conflict. And so in other words, we should find, again, like I've said before, millions and millions of these fossils that are transitioning from one species into another, but we don't. We do not find these transitional fossils, and I'm going to elaborate on this in a minute. So Darwin actually wrote this himself. He says, "Why is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against my theory." Darwin himself acknowledged, like, man, if my theory's right, we should find these intermediate links, these animals that are changing from one animal kind into another animal kind. We should find them all over the place. In every layer of stratum, they should be full of them. And we don't find any. And he's saying, this is a pretty serious objection that comes against my theory. And we still have the same problem today. We do not find these intermediate links in the dirt. We don't see where a starfish went from a starfish into a fish, or a fish to a frog, or a frog to a lizard, or a lizard to a rabbit, or a dinosaur to a bird. We do not find that in the dirt. We have had a number of attempts where people have said, we think we found the missing link. We think we found the missing link, only to discover us after closer examination that no, they weren't missing links. So one of the more famous fossils that they use to be the missing link from dinosaur to bird is the Archaeopteryx. And this is a fossilized bird that they found where they believed it was a dinosaur turning into a bird, and so it proved evolution. And so this fossil has actually had, historically, has had quite the identity crisis. Researchers first classed it as being an ancient bird. And then they changed it to being a dinosaur, and then now it's gone back to a bird again. And so it's not sure what it is. But posted in a science article by Thomas B. on August 5th, 2011, he wrote an article called "The Early Bird Gets the Boot. Researchers reclassify the Archaeopteryx." They said because it had core features that define birds, such as flight feathers, wings, perching feet, and a wishbone, this fossil is just an extinct bird. It is not a dinosaur turning into a bird. It was just another kind of bird that went extinct. But textbooks and museums still teach that the Archaeopteryx is in evolutionary transition from reptiles. But even if its classification waffles again, it is disqualified as an evolutionary ancestor for birds by the fact that scientists found crow-sized birds and an extinct four-winged birds in rock layers designated to and below those containing the Archaeopteryx. And so what happened was they've made discoveries where there are, the crow, for example, a modern bird that we have still today, was buried underneath one of these Archaeopteryx fossils, which means that it's older than this fossil, which means that the dinosaurs didn't evolve into birds. That's not where birds came from. Birds did not come from dinosaurs, because if they did, we wouldn't find a modern bird like a crow buried underneath being older than an Archaeopteryx. We wouldn't find that, but we do. And so a team of Australian scientists recently performed another trait analysis on this fossil, and this one included more studies of its body features. And they published this in Royal Society's Biology Letters, and researchers wrote that the Archaeopteryx assignment to a dinosaur group earlier this year was acknowledged to be very weakly supported. And again, guys, if you want to see the links to all the references where I have these things at the very end of my video, the very last slide, I have references to all of these things. You can look into them for yourself. But the scientific community largely denies that this has anything to do with evolution, and it really was just a bird. And dinosaurs definitely didn't evolve into birds based on this fossil, because like I said, we find modern birds buried below this one. And that, of course, leads to, well, what about all the like Neanderthals and all these different apes turning into humans that we find? And this is one of the problems that we'll see when it comes to secular science in evolution, is that when they find something like, let's say, Lucy, who they deem to be an ape transitioning into a human, when they later discover that it was actually really just a 3-foot chimp, so many scientific articles that put out this finding of this missing link from ape to man, so many of them don't later come back and say, oops, we made a mistake, that's actually not what that was. And so that just leaves the public with believing that this is a fact, that Lucy really was discovered as the missing link between ape and man, and yet nearly all experts agree that it was really just a 3-foot chimp. Same thing with Nebraska Man. That was said to be the missing link from ape to man based on a single tooth, a molar tooth. And what they actually later discovered was that it was the tooth of an extinct pig. It wasn't even an ape. That's how off they were. And yet they were saying it was the missing link from ape to man based on a molar. A molar. And then there's the Piltdown Man, which, again, this one turned out just to be the jawbone of an actual ape. Or the Neanderthal man was proven to be the skeleton of an old man suffering from arthritis. But you don't hear about this kind of stuff. When it gets proven to be something different, you don't hear about it. You only get what they first say. And the last man there, I kind of covered up with my screen just because I didn't want you to see what they were saying. I actually find I found this picture where, and you can look this stuff up and see it for yourself. But he's saying something I think is kind of disrespectful towards evolutionists, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I don't want to be disrespectful towards evolutionists. That's not my heart in doing this at all. I just want to show that there are scientific facts and findings that we have that completely go against the narrative that we've all been told, and that's what I'm pointing out. And I threw this one in there just for fun. What do you think would happen if they found this guy's skull buried in the dirt that was supposed to be really old? What do you think that they would say? You know, this is actually a giant from Russia, and he's a huge man, and he's actually a boxer, but you know, he has a bit of a funny shaped skull. And some of the skulls they show us, they look like this. They look funny like this. And it's like, oh, that might be a transition from an ape to a man. And I know there's a lot more that goes into this than just that. But I'm just saying, based on appearance alone, we've seen some pretty funny skulls come from humans. That doesn't mean they evolved from a monkey. And so again, guys, look at our textbooks. Holt Biology, 2001, page 283. It says this: after observing such differences, Darwin predicted that missing links, intermediate forms between great groups of organisms, should eventually be found. Since Darwin, many of these links have been found. Guys, no, they haven't. They have not found these missing links. And yet, again, in our textbooks, they're saying that they have. And even if you do a Google search on evidence for evolution, the fossil record comes up in the top 3. And yet the fossil record absolutely defies evolution. University professor from Chicago said this. He said, in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find these predictable progressions or these missing links, and in general, these have not been found. Yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbooks. Fantasy is a fancy word for lie, and this university professor is calling it out. There are lies that have crept into our textbooks. And I just threw this in there because it's kind of funny, but we're still waiting to see all those transitionary fossils. Haven't found them, and I'm going to propose to you that we're not going to find them. We've dug up a lot of ground, and they are not there. Why aren't they there? Because evolution never happened. That's why they're not there, and that's why we haven't found them, and we'll continue not to find them, because they don't exist. But again, in our textbooks in school, they all say, oh yes they do. Look at this. This is the evolution of the horse. And the horse went from a four-toed to a single-toed. And this proves that the evolution of the horse really did take place, going from four-toed to single-toed, because we don't have four- or three-toed horses anymore. They must have went extinct because they evolved into the single-toed horse. And yet this was proven to be wrong over 65 years ago, guys. 65 years ago this was proven false. What they don't show you in the textbook is that the so-called first horse, the ancient horse, had 18 pairs of ribs. Then the next one went down to 15 pairs. Then the third one went up to 19 pairs, which is more than what the first one had. And finally we got to our modern horse, which went back to the 18 pairs, which is what the first horse had. And so we see, guys, that this evolution didn't actually take place. These animals are within the horse family, absolutely, but we have small and big horses today. We have mini ponies and Clydesdales. The mini horse didn't evolve into a Clydesdale. They are a variety of kinds within the same kind. And so they're all still horses. They're just a different kind. So this is not showing the evolution of the horse. It's just showing you other kinds of horses that have gone extinct. Not because of evolution, but because they died off. So this was said in 1950 by a man named George Gaylord of Harvard University in Science Monthly. He said, many examples commonly cited as the evolution of the horse family or of the saber-toothed tigers can be readily shown to have been unintentionally falsified and not really to be orthogonogenic, which is progressive evolution. He's saying it's not actually evolution. That didn't happen. Then he said again in 1953 on page 119 of The Life of the Past, the uniform continuous transformation of the ancient horse into the modern horse, so dear to the hearts of generations of textbook writers, never actually happened in nature. Again, the only place you will find the evolution of the horse taking place is in your textbooks. It did not happen in nature. Another science newsletter in 1951, August 25th, the early classical evolutionary tree of the horse was all wrong. And again, 1992, on page 302 of Biology, the Unity and Diversity of Life, another scientist said, other examples, including the much repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse, have not held up under close examination. And so Nathaniel Marsh was actually the guy who came up with this theory of this horse evolution in 1874. And he actually took fossils and bones that were scattered all over the place and put them together in the order he wanted. These bones weren't even found in the same place. So this was really laid to rest on February 5th, 1984, with a discovery in Russia in which was titled in an article, "A Horse from the Dinosaur Epoch." It described how they found modern horses buried in layers with and below the so-called ancient horses. And so they found these modern horses, single-toed horses, buried underneath three-toed horses. And they made the same discovery in South America, where they found the order also to be reversed, going from single-toed to three-toed. So if these horses evolved, then a modern horse, a single-toed, would never be buried below a three-toed horse, because they wouldn't exist before a three-toed horse. And yet they do. These horses would have lived at the exact same time. They would have grazed side by side. There is no evolution taking place. And the Tulsa Zoo in Oklahoma in 1985 actually took down their display of horse evolution because it had been proven wrong. So again, this is another lie that you'll find in our textbooks. And it's the only place, like I said, that you'll find the evolution of the horse. So Darwin himself said in 1859, almost 160 years ago, he said, "Why, if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why is not all nature in confusion instead of species being, as we actually see them, well defined?" So he's saying, hey, why aren't these fossils in the dirt? They should be, and they're not. And why is nature so well defined? If evolution's true, it should be absolutely chaotic and all over the place. There's no mind behind evolution, just random chance. And so he's saying, why do we see things actually so well defined? That doesn't make sense if they actually evolved. He went on to say, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Why then is not every geological formation in every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this, perhaps, is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. Again, Darwin himself acknowledged that these missing links were simply not there. And a man named Luther Sutherland wrote a book called Darwin's Enigma. And he wrote around to evolutionists all over the world and asked, guys, can you please send me some actual evidence of evolution? Where is hard evidence that evolution really took place? And no one got back to him except for a man by the name of Dr. Colin Patterson. So he was the senior paleontologist of the British Museum of Natural History, which has the largest fossil collection in the world. No one has more fossils than this museum. Dr. Patterson had written a book on evolution, so Luther read it and had a question. There were no pictures of fossils or any evidence of animals transitioning from one kind to another that had been presented in Dr. Patterson's book. And so Luther thought, surely if evolution was true, then the place with the largest fossil collection in the world should have evidence of this taking place. And so he asked Dr. Patterson where this evidence was, and in response to Luther's question, Dr. Patterson wrote back and said this: I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would have certainly included them. I will lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil. From an evolutionist who has access to the largest fossil record in the world, he himself is saying there is no missing links. There are no transitional fossils. They don't exist. So I just threw this in there because it's kind of funny. But this monkey's saying, let me see if I got this straight. I survived, humans survived, but every form in between died off, leaving absolutely no trace. So despite all the things that we have discovered, we have no record or evidence of how whales evolved or how birds evolved or how flowering plants evolved. Despite all the fossils we have found, this evolutionary theory remains just that, a theory. And I would call it a bad theory. And I would even go a step further and to call it a fairy tale. Evolution is a fairy tale for adults. It's a religious belief system that requires a tremendous amount of faith. And it being a fairy tale for adults is actually not something I came up with. A university professor came up with that comment, and I'll show you that later in this presentation. So where did all the birds come from? Atheist and bird expert Alan Fiducia answered this question by saying, the true origin of birds is still up in the air. Evolution can't answer where the birds came from. How about whales? Where do they come from? Crompton's Interactive Encyclopedia says, the evolutionary origins of whales remains controversial among zoologists. And here's a cartoon where the whale's saying, how are we ever going to evolve if you keep pushing us back into the ocean? This is for the Save the Whales. What are you doing trying to save them? Leave them alone. They're trying to evolve. They'll grow legs soon enough. Where did all the fish come from? Evolutionist J.A. Long said himself, yet the transition from spineless invertebrates to the first backbone fishes is still shrouded in mystery, and many theories abound. In other words, we have no idea and no evidence to support this ever happening, but you should believe it anyway. And so, guys, that's what they're saying here. We don't know. We don't know how this evolved. And they don't know because they can't find any observational science that shows it happening. Not in the fossil record and not today. You will only find different kinds coming out of the same kind. And so we find a variety of dogs and horses, as I've said, but we never find that dog or horse changing into something else. We don't find it. And so Professor and Dr. Stephen J. Gould from the University of Harvard in Boston said the absence of fossil evidence for intermediate stages has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolutionists. Evolutionists in the real world, not the ones in your textbooks, but in the real world, acknowledge this issue as a huge problem to their theory. Now, evolution is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links not seen. This is evolution's version of Hebrews 11:1, where it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And this is Darwinian evolution's version of that. And so I just want to throw that in there because this is true, guys. This is religious. It's a religious thing. It requires faith. It's not scientific. We don't see these links, and there should be millions of them. And so things like the theory of the horse evolution or the whale evolution or the dino to bird evolution, all of these things have just been grasping at straws because there's not hard evidence for these things truly taking place. And so you'll just find them grasping at straws. And this actually became so frustrating to them that they came up with another theory of how evolution could have happened. And that's called punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium is just a fancy way of saying that instead of evolution happening really slowly over millions of years, it actually happened really, really quickly. And so an alligator actually laid an egg and a bird came out. Or some kind of reptile laid an egg and instead of a reptile coming out, some kind of bird came out. But however, a male and female also had to come out so that they could reproduce and keep going from there. And so, keep in mind, guys, that there's no evidence for punctuated equilibrium actually taking place at all, and the only reason that they came up with this theory is because their main theory, the millions of years, was greatly lacking evidence. There's no other reason to come up with a theory like this if the other one was so solid and concrete. This is the only reason they came up with it, to try to get around what we don't observe in the normal kind of evolution that they propose to us, which is the millions of years. And so yet, in all this, our textbooks only give you two options for the explanation on the origins of life. Either you believe in gradual, slow evolution, or you believe in punctuated equilibrium, fast evolution, but you must believe in one or the other, despite the fact that neither have evidence to back them up. And so another way to say it is, hey kids, you get to choose which lie you want to believe. So are elephants really green or are elephants really blue? You get to decide which lie you want to believe. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're telling them to tell us if elephants are green or are they blue. Those are the only two options. And yet my little gray elephant is down there in the bottom going, hello? The truth is down here, guys. And so it's just not fair to our kids. We have lies that are in our textbooks that have been proven false decades ago and in some places centuries ago. And yet they're still there. That is not education. That is indoctrination. And it's happened to you and it's happened to me and it's still happening to our kids today. And like these university professors who are calling it out, we need to as well. These things should be torn from our textbooks and completely removed. Now, I'm not against you teaching the theory of evolution in schools. But please teach science, not religion. Okay? Don't teach them that these are the only two options, because those options require a tremendous amount of faith, and you've left the realm of science, and now you've entered into the realm of religion. And if you've entered into that realm, then you need to also teach intelligent design, because that is more and more where science is actually pointing. Now, who that intelligent designer is a completely different conversation. But the fact that it's pointing towards intelligent design is a fact. And I'm going to continue to show you that throughout this presentation. But I'm just saying, guys, we need to confront this and have these things ripped out of our textbooks that have been proven to be false. And so anyway, I'm going to go through more. Those aren't the only ones. There's more lies in our textbooks. I'm going to go through some more in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you then. Thanks.